Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, looking very fine, I have Steve Cadigan, who's joining us from California. He's a best-selling author, one of the foremost thought leaders in the world on people and talent. So welcome.
Great to be here, Ross. And if the glow, if I have any, is the relief of all the rain that is finding its way to California right now. So the future is looking brighter and greener. Mm-hmm.
Brighter and greener. Maybe the veggie supplement and drink you mentioned earlier as well might have something to do with it. So you're retained by leaders, investors, organizations, and governments around the world who are really just seeking to make a better future of work. Your first book, Workquake, embracing the aftershocks of COVID-19 to create better model of working. And Steve sits on the board of many fast growth HRtech and talent companies. And in fact, back in 2009, if we can remember back to there, I think everything was black and white nearly. Steve was LinkedIn's first CHRO, where he led the company's hypergrowth. So from 400 employees to 4,000 in 3.5 years. So my first question, Steve, for you is, with more than 30 years in HR, what keeps you coming back each Monday morning to get involved in this space?
Well, Ross, I often refer to myself as, hi, I'm Steve, a recovering human resources professional. Nice to meet you. Well, I tell you what, I think the greatest art form in the world is the art of coordinating people to do something better together. And I feel really lucky to have discovered that at an early age in my career arc, probably around 1 or 2 years into my professional journey out of school. And for all the reasons that I love sport, seeing how people handle certain situations, how someone handles being behind, or how they handle victory, how they handle defeat, how they handle having been the star and no longer being the star, or how they handle absorbing a new offense or a new defense. This is something that is just, it's infinitely interesting to me. And so I stopped being a regular operator in an HR operating role about 10 years ago. And wasn't sure what I was going to do when I left LinkedIn, honestly. And after meeting with dozens and dozens of people that I'd met earlier in my career, but never had enough time to sort of keep those connections tight, reestablish those, and found out that there was a lot of interest in all the new challenges on the frontier of talent today. And we see no shortage of those even before the pandemic hit. But that's probably, if I were to capture why do I love doing what I do, it's really just the newness and the challenges and the infinite, I think the domain change that the pandemic in particular has presented us right now, where we're starting to ask things like, why do we even meet? Why do we work 5 days a week? Who came up with that idea? And we never ask those questions. And that's one of the fascinating dimensions of where we sit today that just keeps me excited to help leaders and organizations try to untangle what seems like just this huge mountain of new challenges all hitting us at once.
It's interesting, isn't it, as we look at human behavior and the beautifulness of that, and also the just bizarre parts of it, whether it's a process or system that we don't ask ourselves the questions of why, we just do it because Steve did it before, or this person did it before, until we're faced with the question of someone saying, why do you do that? Or something that comes along and says, hey, I'm going to change the playing field from turf and grass to water. Or whatever it might be in the game that we're playing. So you cut your teeth in a variety of different HR roles at Esprit, at EA Sports, at Cisco. And what was it that led you in early at LinkedIn, going from these other companies, Cisco, EA Sports, that were perhaps more known, more established at the time? What was if you can remember back, as far as that, Steve, what was the interesting piece to come in as the first in that role in this organization called LinkedIn that we now know, but of course looked very different at that time?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ross. I would probably hone it down to about 3 big things for me. Number one, I spent most of my career in large organizations, large meaning anywhere from 1,000 to 40, 50,000 employees. And when you're in a service role like human resources, you're really, in those big companies, you're tuning the path and the roads and the architecture that's been laid before you. And I was pretty good at that. In fact, I thought, looking at the LinkedIn opportunity, like, well, how hard can this be? Because I've seen every mistake. I've made a lot of mistakes. And the draw was, I'm going to get an opportunity to build something new and really lay a different foundation, take the benefit of all my learnings. And unfortunately, most of us learn so much about how not to lead from what we see than how to lead. And so I was going to really try to, apply all my lessons and build something from scratch. And the clay at LinkedIn, that was the big draw for me, was soft clay. It wasn't hard. And I wasn't coming in to change a culture. I was getting invited in to build a culture. And for many of you who are listening to this, if you've never had that opportunity, it is really hard if you've never done it before. And that was the part that I missed. Well, how hard can this be? Well, actually really hard, because I'll give you an example. The first week on the job, our executives, we met as a leadership team. I think there was probably a dozen of us at the time. And the debate was, should we do performance reviews? Should we not do performance reviews? If we do performance reviews, how often? What score? What rating index? If we have a rating, should we share it with the employee? And should we be doing ranking as well? And what are the attributes we should be ranking? And so I'm sitting in this company, and for the first time in my career, I'd never faced a notion of like, well, why should we even do this? Because every company I've worked for, you just do it because that's how you do it. And now I'm having to break fights because my ex-Googlers, my ex-Yahoo, my ex-Adobe, we need to do it this way, and we need to do it that way. And one of the interesting things, and we could go that direction later if you want to, one of the interesting things about human resources I found is most leaders know what they don't want from human resources, not what they do want. And they've seen more broken systems than really high-functioning talent strategies. So that was a big draw. The other big draw, which a lot of people can appreciate once I share it, which is doing human resources, practicing my craft in a company, building a human resource product, was infinitely exciting. Because not only was I doing my craft, I was also giving advice on product, giving feedback on new things that they were considering on the product and engineering team, the marketing team, but I was also selling the product, because the largest business we had was the recruiting product, and the consumer was my peers around the world. So I would be invited into some of the biggest boardrooms in America, JP Morgan, Walmart, to help, sell my peer in these huge monolith companies with a new recruiting solution. And so those dimensions, the newness, the building something from new, out of nothing in HR, the taking my craft and having so many more challenges was really great. And then just the normal allure of, if you're in Silicon Valley and you have a chance to be, go through an IPO and take a company on an exit, like, wow, that's like a dream. So those are probably the big ones when I look back on it. Yeah.
We often, depending on our view of life, have a fuzzy memory, right? And we can share in a minute and a half all the beauty of what was great. If it's an IPO, don't do it. There was nothing that was set. So, we're defining it from scratch. We're doing all of those things, and we can play our narrative, play our story back in our heads that gets us that gets us smiling, that gets us a sense of pride and remembering those. And equally, there's some dark stuff. There's some shadows. There's some things that didn't work, that didn't go right. And depending on what day of the week it is or who we're talking to, we pull out the hat those different stories. But what I've seen is that over time, the negative tends to fade, and we remember the good stuff, right? That's what we want. We want to remember the good stuff. In terms of when you went in there from these large organizations and past experience, and okay, we're going to do these things. When you were making those decisions, so it's one thing, you could do anything. Deciding what you should do and how is often very difficult. Were there certain principles or decision criteria that helped you evaluate what made it forward to be part of the new way you did things? What was some of the things you helped to frame those decisions?
Wow, really great. I love the way you think about this, and it's so true. The shine of the experience, and the more we have distance, seems to be shinier. A lot of those experiences are really fresh in my mind, and there was a lot of dark moments. Let me tell you, a lot. And I think probably the biggest obstacle that I had to face was trying to build what everyone wanted, from the board to the CEO and the chairman wanted a world-class company. Trying to do that with no budget. Okay, so we don't have a budget. We're not making any money, in the shadow of some of the most prolifically, sexy brands in the world who are also actively recruiting, that I'm supplying the ammunition to recruit against, be Google, Apple, Facebook, and so forth. In those shadows, we're trying to build a world-class company, and they're making more profit at Google in a day than I make in a year. So trying to innovate and really being forced to try to find ways to be world-class with no, treasure of budget, if you will. And ironically, that was a great moment for us, because you've heard the expression, what's the expression? Necessity is the mother of invention. And when our backs were to the wall, and my CEO would always tell me, your job is the toughest in the company right now, because the only thing blocking our growth is hiring people, and hiring really good people, not just normal people, like really superstars. It's got to come through your house, and you've got to help us architect this. When I'd never done that before at that scale, I never, I don't know if anyone who's listening to this has ever been told by their leader, you need to be the best in the world at this, because we are a recruiting company. If we can't be the best recruiting company in the world, we failed our customers. It's our birthright. We have to be. And, that challenge really, helped me sort of recognize that, okay, this is a great opportunity, but scary as heck. And what I learned quickly was, and this is against my nature because I'm a perfectionist and I think no one can do it better than I can, was I'm not going to do this well unless I get the entire leadership team on this train with me. And after many failed attempts to try to do it myself and hire a great recruiting team and really get with the marketing people, really brainstorm this, it wasn't until we had a number of failures that we sort of collectively declared what we call a code red, which is when something's broken in a web-based company and the site's down, it's code red, all hands on deck. We had to have an all hands on deck, and it really forced us to recognize a very simple question. And when I'm working with companies today, I often try to help them, start with this question. If you're struggling to keep people, if you're struggling to hire people, and most firms that I work with today are having this problem, it's great to start with a simple question. Why does anyone want to work here? And having worked in human resources at that point, like 25 years of my life, I never asked the question, because the assumption is because we're good, we're worthy, are we making interesting things, we're going to have a good success, we've got great investors and all that. The problem is everyone has the same answer, right? And when you're surrounded by, sushi chefs and companies offering daycare centers, and, it felt like they were building an a house for your in-laws in your backyard if you have a baby. At some of these companies, it was really impossible. And that really forced us to really have to iterate and be creative and collectively. And I think that's probably the biggest lesson I had in that was, right, when you're in the service business, you could be on all the time, and learning to find ways to turn that off at times, but also gather help from people to help solve the problem. Because if that problem gets solved, their lives become a lot easier too, because recruiting's taking up all the leadership bandwidth, right?
Yeah.
And so, that's probably, for me, that was probably the biggest aha moment was, and it's simple, but it was really powerful for me.
Really powerful. Yeah.
This is really complex. I really need the benefit of everyone on board here. And then let's ask ourselves, what assets do we really have? And why would someone want to come here for less money than they could make somewhere else? Which led us to the problem we're solving matters. And that was the asset we had compared to all those other companies, helping people, potentially your children, your grandchildren, find a more fulfilling path in life. No one could touch that. And so we doubled down on that, and that changed the arc of the company.
It's interesting. And it made me think, as you were talking there, Steve, of the difference that sometimes people get carried away with, that they think they have a problem, but we only have a problem if we don't have the check to solve it. If we have a check that we can solve the problem, actually what we have is a project. And so for you, you had a true problem. You articulated as, necessity is the mother of all innovation. You had a true challenge, a true problem that you had to think creatively. And I guess it was at the time, it also made me think about Moneyball, the Brad Pitt movie, came out 2011, sort of similar time to this, of where same sort of challenges. You've got all these other shiny object teams with big money, big checks, big writing, and you've got this other one trying to compete, which can't write the check. So you have to think differently about how you solve it, and finding what is that element that would mean that we resonate with somebody, that would choose us, rather than getting second rate or getting something and not getting the outcome. So I loved your idea of asking, why would somebody come here? Why would they choose to be it? Finding that, and then just allowing the right people to discover you where that resonates for them. And that's a different proposition. So if we now flip a little bit to the situation we find ourselves in, the context, that was coming off the back of 2008, big financial issues, big decline, all sorts of things. We find ourselves in a similar situation where interest rates are rising. Here in the UK, we've got strikes everywhere. Wherever we are in whatever, geography we exist, there are environmental, political, banking, whatever challenges that exist. And we have companies at all the different life cycles, from just got funding, need to go from 400 to 4,000 people, or we're struggling, need to go from 40,000 to 30,000, whatever it may be. Is there's this constant flux, this constant change. If we settle ourselves for a moment and we come back to it with that 20-year perspective, and then a 10-year out advising, retained in all of these different areas and all of these different pieces, what's your go-to sort of first few questions, first few approaches to just get that lie of the land, establish, code reds, what are the pieces? How do you engage first to help people think about their people in a different way?
Well, I think it's a great question, and it's one I hear all the time. I guess where I would start is by helping people first recognize and appreciate and absorb that we are in a new landscape, that this isn't just a cyclical pattern that will change, that we have forces that have fundamentally changed and will not return to the way they were. And therefore, using old maps in a new landscape is not helpful. So for example, if I ask a leader, what's your biggest problem? The usual response today is, I can't find the people I need with all the skills I need. And when I do, they don't stay as long as I would like them to. So, the first question they want to talk about is, let's talk about why that's happening. And I say, well, that's an important question, but there's a bigger question. Do you think that trend is going to change? Do you think in the future, it'll be easier to hire people? Do you think they're going to stay longer in your organization? And sadly, the answer is usually no, I don't. I said, okay, so what are we building for? We're building with an expectation that the old model of business success is stability, continuity, consistency. The longer you stay, the more confidence I have that you can deliver a steady output, the more my shareholders will believe in us, the more trust we have, I'm feeling good. But I think the reality is, Ross, what I'm trying to help people first start is recognize that actually building for instability and expecting change and newness is more powerful than building for stability, because you are just going to disappoint yourself and you're just going to be miserable if you keep saying people need to stay longer. Instead, if you say, I don't think people will probably stay as long as much as I want them to, as much as I want this great talent that I've invested in and developed, as much as I want it to stay longer, it probably won't, and it has nothing to do with me or how nice I am or how competitive I am with pay and benefits and culture and so forth. There's just a greater choice landscape than we've ever seen before. And more new industries are being created, which is causing real career confusion for a lot of people. So if you accept that, if you're ready to accept that, then what we need to start building is, how do we optimize in a world that's presenting more instability and more change to us? Which gets to what I'm really excited about right now, which is, if you can't find someone with all the skills you need, and you also agree that skills are changing, the need for skills is changing faster than it ever has. Maybe what we should be measuring, instead of how experienced a candidate is how quickly can they learn something new, right? And I call that sort of this moment of truth, where I believe in the next 5 to 10 years, starting with technology companies and then moving on to other domains, we're going to hire people as much based on what they can learn than what they know. Because we know the job's going to change, right? And so that's the real block right now, Ross, is our own sort of inability to recognize that the whole frontier has changed. And I was in Texas last week with about 50 leaders from the employee benefits domain. They used to be, looking over pensions. Those are not, around as much anymore. And, your prime ministers have faced a lot of heat, and Macron's facing a big heat trying to eliminate the pensions in France. And they haven't existed here as much here. But this whole group was looking at me when I was explaining this whole thing like I was sharing a truth they did not want to hear. Yeah. Like, who invited this guy who's presenting a really miserable landscape, which is all the tools and the strengths that we've been building, all the offerings we have just don't add up. So for example, I was saying to them, do you believe the turnover landscape is going to continue at the pace it is and maybe increase again? Yes. Okay. But your product solutions are only for employees who stay in a company, and all your benefits are designed to reward people who stay longer. But you just told me you don't think they will. So have you thought about, instead of offering benefits to employers, offering a platform to employees that can carry from company to company, and it doesn't rely on being in one place? And they're still not at the point where they're ready to accept it.
Yeah, they're still
it's a big leap.
Yeah, it is. And it's uncomfortable for people. If we've had these various things, as you've mentioned, retention equals good, retention equals value. So I need to build a system for retention. Opposite of retention, mobility, fluidity, instability, bad. I want to mitigate that risk. Mm-hmm. If the whole movement is going towards that, what if we could reimagine one that rewards us for mobility, for speed of in and out? You talked about speed of learning, all of those things. It's a bit similar in the healthcare system. We've got a sick care system. It's rewarded by people being sick. Mm-hmm. That transformation required to reward financially, all of these things about people being healthy is not there yet. We talk about it a lot, but there's going to need to be a number of fundamental shifts and trigger for that to cascade out. If we look at the employment landscape, this disconnect between what is the new social contract, what is the ability for us to rally around projects, challenges, opportunities at pace and speed when all things are moving. The game is not being played on a lovely lush green pitch that's the same every Sunday. It's on a moving conveyor belt where it's sand tomorrow, then it's gravel the day after, then it's something else. And we need people to be able to adapt, learn the new things, get the new tools along the way, rather than, no, I need to stop it moving. I need to just make sure and nurture my grass is still lovely and green in my industry. So if we see it, if we have people like you telling us about it, but then leaders going, I don't like hearing it, Steve. How do we overcome that situation? What are going to be the triggers that are going to break it to a point at which it actually then functions effectively? Because at the moment, we've got a lot of dysfunction in the system.
Right. So where I like to start is with facts and data. So let's take the automobile industry right now. If you look at the automobile industry, which has players who've been around in this space for a century, okay? General Motors was founded in 1908, for example. Ford probably earlier. If we took Ford, General Motors, Toyota, and Honda, we look at those companies, there is another company that was founded less than 25 years ago that is worth more than all those companies combined, okay? And that's Tesla, okay? Tesla is run by a madman who has 3 part-time jobs, arguably. And they have tenure of about 2 years. Okay, that's their median tenure is about 2.3. All the other car companies that I mentioned, Ford, Honda, Toyota, and General Motors are somewhere between 5 and 7 to 9 years. Okay. But Tesla does not make as many cars. They have less than 5% market share, and they are barely profitable, if that. Okay. But the financial industry has said that company is worth more than all those other ones combined. And so if I'm looking at the future of work, I'm looking at this old industry that's been around, and the investors are saying, we don't believe the people who've been doing this a century can out-innovate someone who just arrived, someone who's hired outside the industry, okay, and has shorter tenure than everyone else. We think that capacity in today's marketplace is a competitive advantage. We're going to put all our money behind that company, okay? And there's other reasons they built out a great, you could say that they're not the future of transportation, they're the future of energy distribution. There's all kinds of ways you could look at it, but that's interesting. And if I'm a company that's been around forever and I'm looking at that and I'm seeing, investors are valuing the fact that most of the executive team is not at Tesla, is not from the automobile industry. That would scare the heck out of me. I don't know if our listeners have saw this on the news this week, but as we're recording this, General Motors announced 3 days ago an early retirement buyout for every employee who'd been there over 5 years, that they will give you a month's pay for every year of service. Now, obviously it's an American paradigm of employment system. So if you're listening to this from some other part of the world, that's a pretty generous package, 1 month for every year of service. And they offered it to 53,000 professional workers. They have 80, but 50 have been there over 5 years. And all the executives to be eligible only needed to be there for 2 years. Now that's just interesting. They're saying the longer you're here, the richer your package. And we want you to take it and leave because our biggest cost is people, and we need less, we need to innovate better. So it's just that, to me, the automobile industry is a great place to look and go, wow, maybe we've underappreciated new people and new ideas and new ways of solving problems. And the market's really valuing that. And the last point I'll make on this one, I'll turn it back to you, Russ, is when I was at LinkedIn for 4 years of doubling the revenue and doubling the employee base. And that's not even telling how hard that was, because it went from 2 countries to 26 countries. And, that's hard. And trying to, build entities and hire in places you've never been before, where they've never heard of you, like Japan. It was really, really hard. Whenever we had a problem, and it seemed like every week we had a new problem, we would get together as a leadership team, and the CEO would go around the executive table and say, when you're at Google, how'd you solve this problem? When you're at Yahoo, how'd you solve this problem? When you're at, Salesforce, how'd you solve this problem? That's how we would solve problems. We brought our experience solving problems at other places to the table. And if you're in General Motors, bless their heart, I know a lot of their executives, it's a great, interesting company. But when they go around the table and have a problem, it's like, hey, when you're in General Motors Latin America, how'd you solve this problem? Hey, when you're running General Motors Parts Canada, how'd you solve this problem? Hey, when you're running General Motors Europe, how'd you solve this problem? You see the insularness of that. And that therein lies, I think, the beautiful opportunity here of unlocking the diversity agenda at a scale we've never been forced to face before. That diversity of experiences and industries is a huge competitive advantage, but that's not how we've thought about it traditionally. Like, no, you got to do this 5 years before we even listen to what you have to say, because you don't know anything about us. Well, it turns out that's a disadvantage increasingly today. And
we've rewarded and looked for experience in a domain to predict future performance in that domain. So we said, you've done marketing, so you can do marketing again. You've done automotive, so you can do automotive again. If the again is an oxymoron, if the again conceptually doesn't exist anymore because it's always going to be something new, therefore that experience needs to be applied. And what a multiplier it is when it's placed in an area where it hasn't been before. So where you mentioned, let's take automotive and put it in healthcare. Let's take aerospace and put it in, hotels, all of those things that can be industry or experience type. The challenge is then the fear of zero performance. And so we're exchanging risk and perception of a future state of something. So we predict a future state from past success. What we need to remodel, maybe, that you're talking about, is we can't predict it because we've just got to experiment. We've got to do things, and we've got to have diversity from different areas of domains and knowledge because we're facing new challenges. How many do you think are truly new challenges we're facing, or are they similar challenges but with a slightly different set of clothes? What's your view on that?
Yeah, I don't think they're new challenges, but the paradigm is so radically different. It feels arresting. It feels impossible. And that probably is the big mountain. I think we're in our own way. I go into so many organizations and they say, we've got a recruiting problem, Steve. Can you really help us? Because you're the LinkedIn guy and you really grew that. And I said, well, let's start with a very simple understanding. Do you know all the skills and abilities of your existing staff? And they say, well, what do you mean? I said, do you know all the skills and abilities of everyone in this building, everyone in the walls of your organization? Well, no. I said, well, how do you know you have a recruiting problem then? And that's when their head starts spinning around. I said, if you're looking to hire experience, that's one thing. If you're looking to hire and optimize talent, that's another thing. And what you may want to do is say, the people who do this that we can't find in the open market, what skills did they have before? What places did they work before? What industries? And maybe, deconstruct the talent that you need so that you can find it and apply it in new ways. And that, that as a founder, as an entrepreneur, you're constantly putting people in roles that on paper, in the big companies, they would not be hired for.
Yeah.
Right.
And we've got to be comfortable with that learning out loud.
That's right.
And it's not, you go and learn and then you go and deploy. No, it's in tandem. It's in line. You've got to deploy and learn at the same time in that paradox. And we have to create those environments where you talked about speed of learning, diversity of learning. And again, organizations haven't been set up in that way. HR was there to serve when there were compliance, risk, regulation, all of those things of the life cycle with a little sprinkle of performance or development. The flip now is that they need to become the new areas of institutional learning, coaching. These are the multipliers that are going to enable future performance, is learning, coaching, support, all of those kind of functions. And that's destabilizing for people who got applause for knowing the answers, people who got applause for whether it was a promotion or a check
and rewards,
money, reward, all of those things for knowing the answers. And so it's very destabilizing when the applause is no longer for knowing the answers, but you have to go and experiment and figure things out. And I can't applaud you unless you get it right. So it's like even more pressure of those things. So we need to, I think, applause for turning up, applause for the experiment, and how can we engineer the system that allows that to function while we're reestablishing how do I deal in this uncertain world. Conscious of time, because I know we've got a real short, sharp session, and I've got two final things I want to touch on because I know we could dive into so many things.
Sure.
One is around, why are people really struggling to adapt today? Why are leaders and companies really struggling with that is question one. Actually, let's do 2 minutes just on that one, and then I'll finish off with the other one because I know you've got to run in a moment. So why are so many leaders and companies really struggling to adapt?
I think it's because of all the things you said just a moment ago and more. The entire architecture of how we get to work, how we're taught in school, how the paradigms were shaped, what success is defined as, all the reward systems and architecture promotions, all built for stability and continuity and consistency. And well, you can't apply for that job because you haven't been in your role for 2 years, but the job's dramatically changed and so forth. And that's why it's really hard. And the people in positions of power, this whole new domain threatens the power base that they used to achieve their sense of power right now. So that, I think, is it's fear. It's fear of the unknown. Let's just take hybrid, for example. Why, on theory, no one can argue that you want your employees to feel motivated and energized. And what the employee base, professional base, who can work remotely said is, I want more freedom, autonomy, and independence. That's what I want. So why are all these leaders saying, you need to come back here? And I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think a very fundamental reason is because I am the leader and my butt is on the line and I have no proof that we can deliver the same value and upside in, autonomously and more independently as we could when we were together. And I'm not ready to take that risk where, oh yeah, just go work whatever hours you want, wherever you want, whatever coffee shop, no problem. I'm not ready to do that because my job's on the line and my shareholders want to know that we can deliver. And so I'm not there yet, right? Particularly in non-tech. And so that's just I don't have enough evidence. And we are still in the middle of the sausage right now. It's messy middle, as some people like to say. Yeah. So that's why I think, they're not paid, they haven't been paid and rewarded for taking risk at scale that we have to face right now. And that's fundamentally, really, really uncomfortable.
And even, when we look at human psychology and the neuroscience of, even if we have evidence, it doesn't necessarily trigger a change. We can, right. We've had evidence about climate or about this, and we can have a view, whatever we see as facts or what that drives emotion or change or feelings. And so we need to uncover that within leaders to give them an ability of understanding what is going to lead to that trigger change. Is it a set of evidence? Is it some feeling? We've got enough evidence of hybrid working. If we look for it, we've got enough evidence for it not, and we can ignore any of it and carry on regardless. Mm-hmm. So we need to, I think, instill this courage and bravery to act in the unknown. And that's a system piece as much as it is, oh, let me coach you and work with you, Steve, about how you can, re-engineer the processes and bits within your organization.
Yeah. Let me make one more point on this one, because it's at the heart of why are people fearful of change? We've all been taught when faced with something new that the first thing you do is go benchmark someone who's done or achieved or accomplished something you're going through. And today, there is no benchmark. I get asked this all the time, who's the benchmark on hybrid? Nobody, because, and by the way, everyone's move from in-person to hybrid is all different. Because if you were all in person and you went to hybrid, that's one thing. But if you're sort of hybrid before and had some remote, and then you hired a bunch of people, your whole, AB is radically different than anyone that you would want to benchmark against. So that's uncomfortable. We have the lack of benchmarks at the scale of all the things we're facing, supply chain, hybrid, changing psychology of the workforce, higher turnover, lower employee, we have not seen the degree of, limited benchmarks for leaders to use. And so my advice is that's a great opportunity for you to be the benchmark. Yeah. Right. But still, it's still causing people to feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah. And at a fundamental base, when we're in a fear state, our body then actually makes us dumber. We have all of these hormones running. We have different sections of our brains, without going too deep into the neuroscience of it, that limits our ability to think flexibly. We're in a state of cortisol running. And therefore, if we're in that state, it's very hard to ideate, very hard to innovate, because we can't learn. We have to be physically, emotionally ready to learn, to experiment. We're not even talking about that yet, in what fear state does for us. Mm-hmm. And how do we dissipate? We say, oh, go and meditate, go and do this. No, we need to dissipate that before we can get into those abilities. My last piece is around curiosity, Steve. And it's linked to a lot of the themes that we do. And I ask it of every guest, and everyone answers it in really interesting and unique ways. And it's, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And what was it?
For me, I was in a new city last week. I was in San Antonio, Texas. I'm a history major. And my wife and I, whenever we visit a new city, we try to do something we've never done before. And the city of San Antonio is rich in sort of Mexico, American, Spanish sort of conflict and the expansion of the United States out there. And so we spent an entire day taking a tour of the Alamo and then just walking around the city of San Antonio. They have a beautiful river walk there. So I don't know if that's radical, but for me, it was a new city. And if I'm in a new city, I'm not going to just, airport, hotel, conference, hotel, airport. We're going to go soak it in. And so that's probably just so enriching, and we paid for a tour. I don't always do this, but we paid for a tour guide to really, so we could really listen to someone who has, deeper knowledge, and was so worth it. That's all we talked about for a couple of days afterwards, how interesting that was.
It's absolutely valid and relevant, Steve. It doesn't have to be radical for it to be new. And it's something I encourage everyone I connect with to think of it in different ways, that it can be something that's new we haven't done before. Or the Marcel Proust, a novelist, wrote something that I'm going to share the quote to. The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. And so often when we're looking at things, it can be new, or it can be new eyes to the same thing. And I think if we approach our building of better, our building of work, that we try new things, but we also look at things with new eyes, to discover those opportunities that we're seeking in adaptation. Steve, it's been really wonderful to hyper pace our conversation. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to connect, if they're intrigued, they want to get you in for your keynote gigs, for working with you, how do they best reach out to you, Steve?
Very easy to find me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find my website, stevecadigan.com. I also have a channel on TikTok, which is just Steve Cadigan. Easy to find, and you can message me there if it's easier for you. But yeah, Ross, it's been so fun. I'm sad we don't have another couple hours, but let's definitely try to do this again.
We'll do it again. And a question for you for next time. Do LinkedIn, the people that were in it, are you linked to an ID number? And if you are, what number are you? I'd be really interested.
We definitely were at the time. And I think I was like 600 something. Wow. But I mean, I'm not big I was big on collecting all those things, and I could have my whole bookcase behind me filled with all the little trophies and knickknacks.
Or the little bits and pieces.
Right. And I'm not big on collecting all that stuff, probably because I've moved many times and it's like, I'm tired of carrying this stuff with me. But I think it was something like that, but it's not a big thing, for me. And I some people,
it's a page in a chapter of a big book.
Right. Exactly. A very proud chapter, but also filled with lots of hard challenges too. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you for your time, Steve. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Ross.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.